everybody, this is Hua. I am here to return to read to you part 4 of Lethal Kisses. It is a beautiful day here in the East Coast, and I hope that you are all doing very, very well. Parts 1 through 3 can be found in the videos below. And if you have not subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I hope you have been enjoying the stories. I would love your feedback, and for those of you who have left comments, I deeply appreciate your support. Enjoy! Returning to life was what Kristen decided to focus on. And as the days turned into weeks, she gathered up the courage as Scott worked with her on preparing her for trial. He told her that she would be taking the stand and that she had to be ready because Nancy would grill her and make her look like a completely dishonest person. She had to control herself and how she worded her sentence, but to be honest about everything she would say. Scott told her to dress nice but not provocative, and that she had to maintain a professional allure to her character. After spending so much time with Scott, she ruled out that being a lawyer was not a job she'd ever want to do. The night before the trial, she was sitting with her grandfather in his dining room eating dinner with him. Gaylin had business he had to take care of, and she figured she'd spend it with her grandfather. Since everything that had happened, she saw that it took a toll on him. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. He looked up with concern in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I should be the one asking you that question. I've been really selfish in everything. I forgot to take care of you." Corwin smiled and patted her hand. "Darling, you don't need to worry about me. It'll take a lot more than this to shorten my life. I'm just glad you are well. I'm glad Gaylin is taking care of business for me." Kristen frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm glad he's doing the heavy-duty work that my body can't no longer do." I appreciated the handiwork on Leonard's face. Kristen laughed and moved her hand to continue eating. "Grandfather, what will happen if the jury decides on a not guilty verdict? What will happen to Leonard then? And what will happen to my case?" Corwin put his fork down and sighed deeply. "This is the gray area of law that I don't like. As much as I love everything about it, I hate that I can't control the law. If they deliver a not guilty verdict, I'm afraid Leonard will return to social life with mankind, and there's nothing we can do about it. He may have to take a few classes if anything, but he'll be free as a bird." Kristen sat back with a jury look. "I'm so scared." "Hey, look at me." She did. "Give my boy Scott some credit, will you? You haven't seen him in action yet. He's brilliant. He might be able to pull some strings this old guy hasn't seen yet, okay?" Day of the trial arrived, and Kristen pulled on a black long-sleeve dress that covered to her mid-calf and put her hair in a low braid. She felt as if her stomach was going to hurl, and she was shaking. If Gaylin wasn't there to help support her as she walked, she'd have fell. The courthouse was busy for a Thursday, and as she walked into the courtroom, her eyes fell on Leonard, who was dressed nice for the trial, and his lawyer was beside him, all in blue. Scott was dazzling, with a clean shave and an expensive Armani suit. Her grandfather sat beside him, wearing all gray, and Kristen took the seat next to him. Brandon entered the room, and they stood up. "You may be seated. Court is in session. Please bring in the jury." Everyone stood as the jury piled in and sat in their places. Kristen felt her stomach in knots as Brandon stated for opening arguments. Nancy was up first, and she stood up, smoothed down her suit, and walked to stand before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you ever watched someone you love leave you? Have you ever watched someone you love turn away from you? Well, Leonard did, and he had to watch as his wife, the woman he loved, took on not just anyone, but his best friend. Of course, any person would be steaming mad. Now, what he did was wrong. He admitted that. But should he pay a hefty price? No. Give the man a chance to redeem himself and let him have another shot at life. He's just human, as we all are when our hearts are broken. I hope that you will understand that he deserves that much. Today, I am going to show you that Leonard deserves a chance to be back with mankind. Thank you. Nancy came to sit down, and Kristen felt as if she was on fire. Leonard, whatever he had been feeding her, had been lies. And why was she referring to Kristen as his wife? They were already divorced. Scott noticed and patted her arm. Don't worry. I got this, he said. Prosecution, it's your turn, Brandon said. Scott stood up and walked to the jury. He smiled, and then he turned to look at Kristen. This woman, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is Kristen Lindell. He turned to face the jury again. Lindell. Did you hear the last name? Because Kristen and the defendant here are divorced. Divorced. The best thing about divorce is that you are allowed to pick up your life and move on. Today, I will show you why Kristen divorced him and why she is moving on with her life. I want you to judge very well what I'm going to show you, because in the end, if we are left beaten to a pulp by a man who was supposed to be an ex-husband, why should we allow someone like that to enter society? What if he dated your daughter? What if he went after her? How would you feel? Think about that as we begin. Scott tapped twice on his heart and came to sit down. Man, he was good. Kristen was beaming with pride at her grandfather's choice of lawyer. Defense was up first, and Nancy called Leonard to the stand as the first witness. He was smiling, not even a hint of guilt in his eyes as he sat down and got sworn in. Mr. Stetter, how do you know Gaylin Amadeus? He is a friend through business, Leonard said. How long have you known him? For 10+ years. Nancy rounded the table. Can you point out Gaylin to the jury? Leonard pointed straight at Gaylin. Right there. Thank you. Now, during the time of your marriage to Miss Kristen, had the two met? Leonard shrugged. Beats me. Scott stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Indirect answer. Sustained. Answer the question, Mr. Stetter, directly. Leonard sighed. No, they had not. Nancy continued on. Why had they not met if you two were friends? Well, we were always meeting when I flew out of the country, and Gaylin isn't from the States. Nancy nodded in understanding. How long are you and Miss Kristen married? Scott stood up. Objection, Your Honor. I have documents here that clearly prove the two are legally divorced. Brandon removed his glasses. Counselor Gray, do I have to remind you my rules? Nancy shook her head. I apologize, Your Honor. Now ask a question or wrap it up. Yes, Your Honor, she said. Mr. Stetter, how long did you know Miss Kristen before getting married? Not long. We met in college and had a fling for about a year, and then we married shortly after. Has she ever been unfaithful in your time as your wife? No. Has she ever been unsupportive as a wife? No. Kristen swallowed hard, listening to Leonard. At least he was being honest about her being supportive. She reached over and held her grandfather's hand. Mr. Stetter, can you describe the day of the event? I woke up, I had lunch, then I went to visit her at the office and found that she was talking to Gaylin in the parking lot. I followed them. She had gone to his hotel, and the next morning when I came back, her car was still in the parking lot, so I went upstairs and found her in his room. What did you find? I found her, looking like someone had given her a good time all night long. And then what happened? I got mad, and my anger took over me. Did you hit her? Yes, I did. Where did you hit her? Leonard sat up. I don't know. I just started hitting. I can't remember where. Do you regret it? This time Leonard looked right at her. Yes, I do. Deeply. Kristen ignored the gaze he left burning in her as he returned his look to Nancy. She returned to the desk and looked at Brandon. No more questions, Your Honor. You're a witness, Brandon said to Scott. Kristen took a deep breath as Scott stood up and walked to the middle of the room. Mr. Stetter, can you tell us about Joanne? Nancy stood up. Objection, Your Honor. On what grounds? Brandon asked. What does Joanne have to do with this? Nancy asked. Scott turned to face Brandon. Your Honor, I'm trying to show what kind of man Leonard is. Joanne is very much a part of his life if you allow me to show you the facts. I'll allow it. Nancy sat down, defeated again. Leonard's face turned ashen white as Scott once again repeated the question. He remained silent and chewed his lips. Mr. Stetter, might I remind you that you are under oath? Answer the question, Brandon said sternly. Sighing deeply, Leonard replied, She's my secretary. Correct. But is she also not the mother of your 2 kids? The room went quiet, and it took a moment before Leonard finally nodded. Please verbally answer, Brandon said. Yes, Leonard said meekly. When did she become the mother of your 2 kids? Before or after your divorce with Miss Kristen? Objection, Your Honor, Nancy shouted, standing up. This was not given to me in discovery. Scott turned to Brandon. Your Honor, their divorce is a matter of public records. If only Counselor Gray had done her research, she'd find out when their divorce was finalized in paper. Nancy sat back down and rubbed her head with frustration. Forget the objection. Continue, Brandon said. Mr. Stetter, once again I ask you, when did Joanne become the mother of your kids? Before or after your divorce? Leonard glared at her and then returned his gaze to Scott. Before my divorce. So by saying before your divorce, you are agreeing that you were unfaithful to your then wife? Yes. Is that what caused your divorce? Yes. Mr. Stetter, have you ever been violent towards your wife during your course of marriage? Leonard sighed deeply. No, never. You've never hit her prior to this incident? No. Mr. Stetter, can you explain to the court why you were seeking her out after you were no longer her husband in paper? Leonard leaned forward. I was jealous. Any husband would be. Ex-husband, Scott corrected. No further questions, Your Honor. As Gaylin watched Kristen fumble with her hands, he reached over and took one hand in his. They were sitting outside on the front steps of the courthouse during lunch break. The look in her eyes told her the fear she held inside her heart. He could read her well, and he hadn't even known her that long. When Leonard was on stand, he could see how her shoulders had frozen up and how she was slouched from the look the snake had given her. He was afraid of her losing her courage when she was on stand due to the fact that Leonard could cut her bravery with one cold look. Are you okay? He asked gently. She shrugged with exhaustion. I'm not sure. It's been a long day and it's not even close to being over yet. Will you promise me something when you go on stand? She didn't answer, and he went on. If you need to look anywhere for encouragement, find my gaze. I'll be there. Search for my eyes in the crowd. She burst out crying, and he drew her into his arms, holding her gently and laying his hand on her head. This moment, she seemed so small, like a child, as her sobs tore at his heart. Through her sobs, she managed to mumble a thank you. When she pulled away, he tilted her chin and smiled at her. Can I ask for a kiss before we go back in there? His heart pounded with life when she gladly met his lips. Gaylin saw the shaking of her hands as she took the stand and was sworn in. He knew that Nancy would grill her to the point of making her look like a fool. Scott stood up and began walking to her. "Miss Kristen, how long were you and Mr. Stetter married?" he asked. Kristen sat up straighter and cleared her throat. 8 years. And through those 8 years, had he ever been violent against you? No. Was this prior incident the first time he's hit you? Yes. Has he ever shown you a side of him that would make you fear him? No. Can you describe to the jury what you were doing that day, please? Gaylin saw her eyes flicker, and he put his hands together to pray that she would find his eyes, and then when his eyes settled on his, he gave her a warm smile. It seemed to have worked, because she took a deep breath and began to speak. I was at work and came out to go home when Gaylin met with me in the parking lot. We were talking, and then I went with him to his hotel room. Were you aware that Mr. Stetter was following you? No, I was not. And what happened at the hotel with Mr. Gaylin? We had a consensual relationship together. Scott nodded and stuck his hands in his pocket. Had you ever met Mr. Gaylin before? No, she answered. Why not? Objection, Your Honor, Nancy cried, leading the witness. Scott removed his hands and smiled. Your Honor, I'm trying to have Miss Kristen explain why, in the 8 years of their marriage, has she never met a good friend of her ex-husband's. I'll allow it, Brandon said as Nancy sat down fuming. Miss Kristen, you may answer the question. Leonard had business that took him out of the country, and Gaylin lived in England. Most of the time, that's where they met to conduct their business transactions. And even if Gaylin did come into the States, it was a very short visit that involved office meetings and nothing personal. During this time of the marriage, when did you discover that your ex-husband was having an affair? When he was taking long trips out of the country. According to the divorce grounds, it was you who discovered Mr. Leonard with his secretary. Is that right? Thank you. Now, can you explain what happened when Mr. Leonard found you at the hotel? Kristen's face lost its color, and Gaylin swore under his breath, but she regained control and said in a strong voice, Gaylin had gone for a run when I woke up. I heard a knock on the door, and when I opened, Leonard was standing there. He pushed his way in and began accusing me of cheating on him with his best friend. And then he started hitting me. He threw me against the wall and over the table. Her voice broke, but she regained her control. I thought I was going to die, but Gaylin walked in and saved me. That's all I remember. Thank you. No further questions, Scott said as he returned to sit down. Your witness, Brandon said. Nancy stood up with a smirk on her face, ready to damage her. Miss Kristen, are you known to sleep with your husband's best friends? Objection, Your Honor, Scott said as he stood up. May you remind Counselor Gray that my client has legally divorced Mr. Leonard. If she keeps referring to him as her husband, I will have no choice but to object every single time. Brandon removed his glasses and sighed deeply. Approach the bench, counselors. Both Scott and Nancy walked forward to where he sat. He narrowed his eyes to Nancy. Counselor Gray, I don't know what kind of dance you're doing, but here in my courtroom, it's not allowed. Either you knock it off and use the correct terminology, or I'll dismiss your case and you'll have an ugly streak to your record. Is that clear? Nancy blushed. Yes, Your Honor. Scott returned to his seat as Nancy walked to stand before Kristen. Miss Kristen, you claim that you have never met Gaylin before. How is that possible when you and Mr. Leonard have been married for 8 years? Like I said, he conducted business overseas, and I wasn't there. How could you not ask to go? I mean, are you stupid? Objection, Your Honor. She's badgering my witness. Sustained, Brandon said. Strike one, Counselor Gray. Nancy cleared her throat. When Leonard showed up at the hotel, how did you look like when you answered the door? Kristen's face burned, and she remained silent. Scott stood up. Objection, Your Honor. What does that have to do with anything? Your Honor, I'm trying to have Miss Kristen explain how she looked like when she opened the door, because it may be the reason for why my client lost his emotional control. I'll allow it, Brandon said. Crap, Gaylin thought as he leaned back in his chair. He watched as Kristen's face turned red, and then tears filled her eyes. One dropped down her cheek, and she answered in a small voice. I answered the door, having just woke up. And what were you wearing? Nancy asked. I was wearing Gaylin's shirt. Nancy turned away and said to the jury, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let it be known that Miss Kristen answered the door wearing her new lover's shirt. Kristen's face broke, and he whispered softly, Look at me, baby. Look at me. Find me. And then her eyes shifted and landed on his gaze. He, for the first time since he had been broken, mouthed something he hadn't said in a long time. I love you. The shock on her face was enough that she was not expecting that from him. But it gave her the strength she needed, because when Nancy asked how long she and Gaylin had been seeing each other, her voice was stronger. We'd met just a few days ago. Nancy laughed. Is it in your common interest to sleep with men you've just met? Kristen gave a soft smile. No, but take a look at Gaylin and you tell me. This got a chuckle out of everyone, including Brandon himself. Nancy was flustered, and although she did turn to glance at Gaylin for a moment, she was not impressed. Why would you open the door wearing your lover's shirt? Nancy asked. I had a wonderful night with Gaylin. I was not expecting Leonard to be at the door or anywhere near me. We're divorced. I'm allowed to sleep with whoever I please. Nancy cleared her throat. No further questions, Your Honor. Brandon turned to Kristen. You may step down, Miss Kristen. The defense rests, Nancy said. Mr. Scott, all yours. Scott stood up and called Gaylin to the stand. He stood up, buttoned his suit, and walked over to take a seat. He could see the smirk on Leonard's face, and he saw the effect he had on Nancy. This was going to be fun. Scott walked to him and cleared his throat. Mr. Amadis, can you tell us your relationship with Mr. Leonard? Leonard and I are business partners. I'm curious. Both Leonard and Kristen have said you dealt mainly with Leonard, but you yourself have never met his ex-wife. Were you surprised when you met her? I was. Why is that? He narrowed his gaze at Kristen. In her own words, take a look at her, Mr. Scott. Again, the jury and Brandon laughed. I have. And yes, you're very lucky. Now, describe to me the relationship you and Kristen formed. The attraction was quite strong from the beginning for both of us. She tried to deny me from the start due to the fact of her wounded heart from the breakup with Leonard. To be completely honest, I was one who pushed the relationship. So she wanted nothing to do with you. That's right. From the beginning, she asked me to stay away. And did you? If I did, we would not be here. Point well taken. Can you describe the day of the incident? Kristen came to spend the night with me at my hotel. The morning of, I woke up and went for my usual run. I left her a note telling her so. After I finished my workout, I came back to the hotel and heard her voice screaming. I ran in to see Leonard crouched over her, hitting her repeatedly. And what did you do? I gave him a piece of his own medicine. So you hit him. Hit is putting it lightly. I beat the crap out of him. Scott nodded. How would you describe your relationship with Leonard today? Gaylin glared at Leonard. What relationship? No further questions. Scott sat down and Nancy stood up. She rounded the corner of the table and kept her gaze on him. As she neared him, he gave her a soft smile. She tripped on her heel and coughed to recover her mistake. Counselor Gray, do you need a moment? Brandon asked. No, Nancy said loudly. Mr. Gaylin, are you comfortable knowing you destroyed a relationship with my client? I am. Why is that? Your client is a coward, and I don't associate myself with cowards. Nancy swallowed hard as Leonard's face turned white. Mr. Gaylin, out of all the women in the world, why would you pursue a relationship with my client's ex-wife? You stated yourself that you were the one chasing. Gaylin smiled. I did chase, and I got her. Of course, I can get any woman, but there's only one I want to have, and I already have her. Mr. Gaylin, what makes her a woman of your chasing? Objection, Your Honor, Scott said, standing up. What does Mr. Gaylin's taste in women have to do with any of this? Counselor Gray, ask a question or sit down. Nancy cleared her throat and with a defeated shrug said, No further questions, Your Honor. The rest of the day followed with questions from the police officer who came on the scene to the hospital staff who took care of her wounds. Gaylin watched as Leonard's shoulders began to lower again and again after each witness described the personal injuries he created on Kristen. At 4 o'clock, closing arguments were ready to be stated. Nancy went first. She stood up and Gaylin could see that she knew she had been defeated, but she still gave her best at the last battle. You have seen today's arguments about my client. Yes, he made a mistake, a costly one that jeopardized a lot about his life. However, it was based on emotions from a past relationship. It doesn't mean that he is like this toward the community as a whole. Please give him the light of day as you make your choices. Thank you. Scott rounded the corner and walked right to the jury to place his hands on the bar. I don't think I have much to say except that the evidence today spoke for itself, really, on what kind of person my client is. The suffering she's been through and that she deserves a whole new life without fear of having to constantly look behind her shoulders at a man who caused her to suffer injuries. Just imagine having to wake up each day to wonder if you will have to call the cops just because you thought you saw a familiar face peeking at you from the crowd. Take that into consideration, ladies and gentlemen. Make the right decision. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed part 4. Part 5 will be put up shortly for your enjoyment. In the meantime, love and light, peace and healing.